Ryan, why are you so hard on Bill O'Reilly when he defends Christopher Columbus? The sailor did discover the Americas. Sure, he owned a slave or two, but hey, didn't everyone back then? He wasn't a bad guy, right? Wrong. And watch on to learn why. Hi, I'm Ryan F. Gassian. In this video, I want to talk about an article Bill O'Reilly wrote about Christopher Columbus. In it, O'Reilly argues that violence was committed by both sides, Columbus and the native people he conquered and enslaved, as a way to excuse Columbus, or at the very least, minimize the horrible things he did. Now, I have no doubt that the Aboriginal people of that era did some nasty stuff. Every culture has its own black spots in history. But understand, Columbus wasn't just an explorer, he was a conqueror, and that's an important distinction. Columbus once wrote, "Your Highnesses, as Catholic Christians and princes who love the holy Christian faith and the propagation of it, and who are the enemies to the sects of Islam and to all adulteries and heresiers, resolve to send me, Christopher Columbus, to the said parts of India to see the said princes, with a view that they might be converted to our holy faith. Thus, after having turned out all the Jews from all the kingdoms and lordships, your Highnesses gave orders to me with sufficient fleet I should go to said parts of India." If that's not evidence that Columbus came to conquer, he also wrote about his earliest encounter, and I quote, "As soon as I arrived in the Indies, in the first island which I found, I took some of the natives by force, in order that they may learn and might give me information on whatever there is in these parts. And so it was that they soon understand us, and we them, either by speech or by signs, and they have been serviceable." Finally, his actions were never motivated by self-defense or any other mitigating factor. As he wrote about another encounter, "They do not bear arms, and do not know them, for I showed them a sword. They took it by the edge, and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They would make fine servants. With 50 men we could subjugate them all, and make them do whatever we want." End quote. From the second Columbus left his boat, he showed the natives nothing but hostile intent. Even if all the natives were savage cannibals, Columbus was still an aggressor, going to the Americans with the purpose of conquering their lands, and eventually he did. He was the governor of the Dominican Republic for a time. To say that there was violence on both sides would be like saying there was violence on both sides when Hitler invaded Poland. Those nasty Poles refused to let Hitler subjugate them. If they had just laid down their arms and submitted to Nazi rule, then maybe Hitler wouldn't have to kill so many of them. Poor, poor Hitler. Columbus was encroaching on the native people's lands. They had every right to defend themselves, just as the Polish were justified in resisting the Nazis. If Columbus was a true explorer, one with no ill intent, then maybe O'Reilly's argument would fly. But that wasn't the case, and Columbus was definitely in the wrong. Now, I know what you're going to say next, and this is an argument that O'Reilly also makes. But Ryan, Columbus was from a different time. People don't value life back then as we do today, and if we're going to condemn Columbus, shouldn't we also condemn George Washington? After all, he did own slaves. Okay, let's have that argument. And for argument's sakes, let's say I agree with you. So instead of judging him by our standards, let's judge Columbus by his people's. Would his behavior have been viewed as justifiable by the Spaniards of that era? The answer is no. A priest who accompanied Columbus on his voyages wrote in vivid detail the unchristian behaviors Columbus and his men showed to the natives. How, and I quote, "They attacked the towns and spared neither the children nor the aged, nor the pregnant women nor women in childbed, not only stabbing them and dismembering them, but cutting them to pieces as if dealing with sheep in a slaughterhouse. They took infants from their mothers' breasts, snatching them by the legs and pitching them head first against the crags, or snatched them by the arms and threw them into the rivers, roaring with laughter and saying as the babies fell into the water, 'Boil there, you offspring of the devil!' On and on the priest's testimonies go, with him describing even greater depravities. Later in life, Columbus was stripped of his governorship, arrested, and sent home to Spain over his methods and practices. While he managed to avoid prison and even convinced others to fund his fifth and final voyage, he never regained his governorship, and this demonstrates that his behavior wasn't considered the norm. Most Spaniards of that era didn't approve of the level of cruelty that Columbus often displayed. George Washington, on the other hand, was never considered immoral or depraved by his fellow Americans. Instead, he was seen as a man of integrity. Yes, today we view the ownership of slaves as an evil, and rightfully so. But again, it was the norm of his time. That is why it's easier for us to overlook his bad behavior. Furthermore, Washington wasn't defined by slavery. He was known for winning the revolution that birthed his nation, and then being its first president. But in the case of Columbus, he's famous for exploring the Americas in his quest to conquer new lands for Spain. Enslaving, raping, and pillaging was what he was all about. If you want to make the argument that Columbus deserved credit for finding the Americas, fine. Technically, it's not true. The Vikings beat him by a few centuries, and the natives were already there. It was hardly undiscovered. But yes, his voyages paved the way for colonization of the Americas, and that is significant. However, if you intend to teach history, give it a true account. Spare me the whitewashing. Christopher Columbus wasn't a noble explorer, but a greedy and sadistic conqueror, even by the standards of his day, and the natives were in the right for resisting him. O'Reilly has a long and shameful history of trying to minimize past atrocities, usually so he can justify some despicable action today. Once, while debating General Wesley Clark on Fox News, O'Reilly brought up a story about Americans killing unarmed Germans at Normandy to argue that atrocities have always been committed, even by Americans, so we shouldn't talk about what happened at Abu Ghraib, a prison where Iraqi detainees were tortured and defiled by U.S. servicemen. The story O'Reilly cited didn't take place. In fact, the opposite was true. The Nazis slaughtered 84 unarmed Americans at Normandy, and before you defend O'Reilly, know that this was the second time he told this exact lie on air. He has no excuse. Instead, it shows just how far he's willing to go to score political points. I don't know why he felt the need to defend Columbus. Maybe he just doesn't like people who are arguing that Columbus Day should be changed to Indigenous Peoples Day. I can understand why some are uncomfortable with altering cherished holidays. It feels like an attack against them, which it isn't. But it might be that O'Reilly doesn't like being reminded that we weren't colonists, but invaders. Regardless, the point he made were indefensible and needed to be called out. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button below and subscribe. Oh, and please visit my website at www.darknessinamerica.com, where you can read short stories that take place before my upcoming sci-fi novel, Darkness in America. In the future, the United States befalls a dark age, where its citizens live in fear of the Inquisitors, telepathic assassins who police the populace for thought crimes. Again, thank you for listening, and in the immortal words of Mr. Spock, live long and prosper.